Lesson 3, Getting Started. Pour 30 milliliters of tap water into the cylinder. Have your partner double check the water level to make sure it is correct, and then pour the water into the beaker. Now, on your lab sheet, we're on step 5, measurements in milliliters, the amount of water that you started with. Use the forceps, pick up the sponge by an edge and dip it into the water in the beaker. Let the sponge absorb as much water as it can. Then, using the forceps, lift the sponge out of the water and let the excess water drip into the beaker. Continue to hold the sponge while your partner pours the water from the beaker into the graduated cylinder. Read the level of water in the graduated cylinder and subtract it from the amount of water you started with. This is called the amount of water absorbed by the sponge. Record this on your paper. So the amount of water not absorbed by the sponge is 5 milliliters? 5 milliliters. So we will record that amount. So the amount of water absorbed by the sponge would be found by subtracting 5 from 30. So the amount of water in the sponge is 25 milliliters. Water in the graduated cylinder into the sink or a large container. Now hold the sponge over the beaker. Remove the sponge from the forceps. Squeeze as much water as you can from the sponge into the beaker. Then pour the water you have squeezed out of the sponge into the graduated cylinder. Read this level of the water on the cylinder and record this as the amount of water I could squeeze from the sponge. So the amount of water that we could squeeze from the sponge is 23 milliliters. Now, to figure out the amount of water that remains in the sponge, we're going to subtract the amount we could squeeze from the amount we originally absorbed. So 25 minus 23 is going to be 2 milliliters of water still remains in the sponge. Now discuss the following questions with your group and answer them on your lab paper 9A and 9B in complete sentences.